invitation, and very glad to welcome you to this event organized by my colleague Clara Ponsatí here, and this is also co-sponsored by the EU program on Princeton. I'm very pleased to welcome back to Princeton Professor Clara Ponsati, who I said welcome back because many years ago, not that many years ago, but when she was a graduate student, got to spend a little bit of time at Princeton. Dr. Ponsati is an economist, specialist in game theory, and is really an accidental politician, as she told me today. Prior to being a politician, she had a very distinguished career as an economist. She taught at the Universitat de Barcelona for many years, and then, among other positions, moved to the University of St. Andrews, where she was the chair of the economics at the School of Economics and Finance. So, but after that very distinguished career, she became, her biggest claim to fame was that she actually became a Minister of Education in the Catalan government. And then I will let the conversation explain what happened next and how she ended up in exile and arrested and everything else. Since 2020, she has been a member of the European Parliament and is also going, I'm sure, to tell us a little bit about that experience. And maybe we'll get to hear about what comes next. So the conversation she will be actually in conversation with my colleague, Professor Carles Boix. Professor Boix is the Robert Garrett Professor of Politics and Public Affairs at Princeton. His research is at the intersection of comparative politics and political economy, and he specializes on the choice of institutions, growth, and inequality. He's a very prolific writer who has written many books, many prize-winning books and articles. I'll cite a few of the most recent ones. 2015, Political Order and Inequality. The latest one, at least from the bio that I have, I'm sure you have another one in the works, 2019, Democratic Capitalism at the Crossroads, Technological Change and the Future of Politics. Professor Boix graduated from the University of Barcelona and then got his doctorate at Harvard, where we met many years ago.
Not that many. We are young. Sophie, don't.
Years ago. So we asked Professor Boix to do a conversation, and then we'll turn it over to the students and to the audience with a priority to students for questions. That's how we do it here at LISD. Thank you very much all for coming. We understand there's so many competing events on this campus just today, and we are extremely pleased at how many people showed up for this event. So, Dr. Ponsati, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Okay, so let me start. Just one clarification. How much time do we have for the conversation, strictly speaking, and when do you want us to turn to questions? Okay, that's fine. Okay, so let me start by thanking Professor Ponsati for being here. She's also in her way to Stanford to also talk about self-determination in the European Union and in relationship with the Catalan case. And I want just to start where Sophie left it, which is basically with the accidental politician thing, which I like as a line. In the summer of 2017, you received a call from the then president of the Catalan government to become Minister of Education in that government. You accepted, I think, pretty quickly, I guess. And at that time, this was at the height of this movement for self-determination in Catalonia. In the summer of 2017, the Catalan government had already announced that it would organize a referendum in October of 2017. And then in September, the Catalan parliament passed a legislation committing itself to implement the results of the referendum. The referendum took place 5 years and 1 month, really, to this date. and a lot of people went to vote. About, I guess, I mean, the numbers are slightly contested, 45% for sure. The Spanish police, the Spanish government threatened with action or with, some sort of strong measures. They sent the police beat up people in the polling stations, disrupted the vote in some places. But at the end, the referendum took place, and most of the population that went to vote voted for independence, since that was a binary vote. It was yes or no. The yes won, but at the end, after back and forth, 4 weeks later, the Catalan government, the Catalan parliament made a sort of formal or nominal declaration of independence, but kind of didn't follow on that. The Catalan government went into exile, at least temporarily. Some people came back. So my first question is, why, after all this process of mobilization and the results of the referendum, why is that it didn't, and the commitment itself, it didn't, independence was not, it was proclaimed in some way, but not defended. And it took also so long to decide. So what happened? You were the accidental politician, the game theorist inside the government. It's almost like an anthropologist, really, an economist, ethnographer. And so what happened?
Okay, I'll try to answer. Before I get into that, let me just thank the Liechtestein Institute and the European Center for inviting me here today, and Carles for volunteering to do this conversation with me. It's an immense honor and a great pleasure to be back in Princeton after I've been here on and off many times, but haven't been back to the States for the last almost 10 years. So I'm very, very pleased that my first return to America is on this wonderful autumn of Princeton. So thank you very much. And now, okay, let me try to answer this question. There is not an easy answer. Why did the Catalan political leadership not go on in their move for independence after going through the process of of setting up the laws in the parliament, having them approved? They were laws that committed the Catalan government to move on to set up an independent state if the result of the referendum was positive. And that did not happen. Okay. I have several explanations for that. They are complementary. I don't know for certain which one is the best explanation. I think that the Catalan political leadership joined in the cause of Catalan independence through the course of the decade from 2010 into 2017, pushed by grassroots demand of self-government that was not getting a response in Spain. There was a revision of the Catalan Charter of Self-Government that was defeated after very complex negotiations, and arrangement was erased through the Constitutional Court in 2010. And that generated popular movement in support of independence. Well, that generated. We can put, if we want to, if we look at the opinion polls and elections, the moment in which independence, which had always had some support but not very strong, it became, very respectable, if not majoritarian demand after the Catalan Charter, the revised Catalan Charter was eliminated. So from then on, that's 2010, and we are at right now at 2023, Catalan, the community of Catalonia doesn't have a proper legal arrangement of self-government because what Catalans voted was eliminated and nothing has substituted that. So this generated a huge mobilization, which was mostly grassroots, that expressed the frustration that, well, we've tried to live our political life as a nation inside Spain for the last decades. We have collaborated, we have contributed. When we talk about contribution, we also mean financial contribution. But when it comes to our self-government, the Spanish institutional arrangement doesn't respond to our needs. We have no recourse to mediate in case of conflict with the Spanish authorities. So there is no way that Catalans as a nation can go on and prosper within Spain. And that's, at that time, was a quite general state of mind. And politicians adapted to this popular demand, so to speak, with more or less or non-conviction. But the fact is that Catalan political parties that have lived through the Spanish transition up to the 2000s and the late 2000s started to include independence in their agenda. And that became the majoritarian view in the parliament after 2015. But it's probably true that for those political forces, or for a large fraction of this political elite, the subscription to the independent cause was sort of a bargaining strategy to see if their frustrated negotiations with Spain would yield better results. That's an hypothesis. And so they went on with the plans. After 2015, there was a big coalition of the main political parties that ran on an explicit independent platform. They did not win more than 50% of the vote, but they had the majority of the parliament with the support of a smaller independentist leftist group, and they set into government. And that was the first steps of the Puigdemont government, who eventually went on to call for a referendum. And who eventually, with a lot of external support of the grassroots movement, organized a referendum and held a referendum. And the referendum was, in a way, probably the success of the referendum. The fact that with the referendum being declared illegal by the Spanish authorities, and not only declared illegal, explicitly and very physically combated by the Spanish police, in spite of that, a huge amount of people went to the station polls and voted. And it was this sort of collective surprise that, we were there and they said, what the hell, we're here, people are coming, we're voting, the referendums happen. And I think that surprised Catalans who were there on that day, because many of them thought, well, I am brave enough to go, but my fellow citizens, fellow Catalans may not want to go, because who wants to go to vote in front of the police? but it also surprised the Catalan government. But they had, made a very strong commitment in front of the Catalan parliament, which is the representation of the Catalan people, and they had an obligation to follow their commitment. And it was at this point, they were unprepared to follow suit with the commitment, because all this politics was probably only a strategy to see if Spain would eventually react and offer the charter of self-government that we still don't have. So what happened after the referendum and the collective surprise that the referendum was a big success considering the circumstances. Of course, following with the commitment that was taken in the parliament was not going to be easy if they had decided to do that. But the fact is that at that point, and this is when my anthropological or game theoretical, I was there as an observer, seeing what was going on in the cabinet after this the success of the referendum, and it was clear that they were not mentally, let alone logistically or politically or diplomatically prepared to take the next step, which was really to tell to the world Catalans have self-determined, and from now on, we're an independence. They were not prepared for that. We can be very critical of how come they were so irresponsible to go so far without the preparation, or we may be more benign and say, well, the reaction of Spain was so harsh that who could have expected that the reaction was going to be hard, and it's natural that in a democratic polity, people are not prepared to face repressive and authoritarian action. So I'm not going to take sides on this debate, but the fact is that the referendum took place, but everything else that you need to become an independent country, mostly a very committed and brave and solvent leadership, that was not there. I think that's the answer to your question.
Thank you. So I know that you left Barcelona on the day after the
6 years ago.
6 years ago and 2 days.
And 2 days.
And 2 days, right? So October 28th. And so why did you leave for Brussels? I know, the ways in which you can. So the first thing for those that do not know this is that the people in the government all left, I think, if I correct about this, for a couple of days, and then some came back and some decided to stay abroad and went to basically to Belgium, and I think a couple to Switzerland, or perhaps those that went to Switzerland were not. I don't remember. So of course, the way in which this was constructed, so nothing happened really, and the Spanish right mostly talks about this as a coup, and I think of it more as a civil disobedience situation. So why did you leave for Brussels? Why didn't you stay?
I didn't want to go to prison. That's the straight answer. I thought that I had a job in Scotland.
But someone in the audience said, there was a reason, but some of your colleagues in government didn't think about it this way, right?
No, at the time, I think that they had the impression that if they were submissive, Spain was going to be more generous. So I don't think they were expecting to spend 3 years in prison, as more than 3 years in prison, as some of them. But so why did I leave? I left on my own on the same day that the parliament proclaimed independence, because I didn't. I felt a sort of this may sound a little bit too grand, but say it anyway. I'll find a historical responsibility. I just thought that as a member of a government that had taken my country all the way to declare itself independent, even if nothing else was going to happen after that, it was not right to directly surrender to a Spanish judge. So I left on my own, thinking that I was going to be the only one doing that. Then it turned out I had some discussions with my colleagues. I told my president that I was leaving. So, maybe that had some influence on their decision to leave as well. I don't know. The fact is that I left and went to France on my way to Scotland. And when I was on my way to Scotland, still in Catalonia, in northern Catalonia, in France, in Perpignan, I received a call telling me that some of my colleagues were coming to a meeting in France. And then in that meeting, there was some discussion of whether we should go into exile or not. It was a very confusing meeting. I didn't quite get the message of whether they were going to go to exile or not, and what President Puigdemont was going to do. So I took the train and went to Paris. I met some of my friends there. And my plan was, well, after that, I will, take another train, go to London, and then go back home where I had a job. And anyway, during this interval, President Puigdemont decided to go to Brussels. And they called me, and out of loyalty, I followed him. And, and I have spent quite a bit of my time supporting his cause in exile. I think that he has had some good things. And eventually that took me to the European Parliament.
So Spain has tried to have European judges extradite you and also the others that are in exile back to Spain, but it has failed. Spain has failed. So it sort of, to me, reflects bad on the Spanish institutions, that there is this kind of mismatch between European evaluations of what happened and the Spanish evaluation. But somehow Spain has got out of this quite well. So, when you think about discussions in Europe about which are the countries that are sort of misaligned, everybody thinks of Hungary and Poland, but not really about Spain. So why? Now that you have, you mentioned that, you have been, for those that know this, that Professor Ponsatí now is a member of the European Parliament. Of course, it's advertised for this conversation. But so now that you have some, interaction with European parliamentarians and others, why is that there is this sort of different evaluation of these countries?
Well, to say it shortly, Spain is part of the present governing coalition in Brussels. And it's a very big member state. Poland is also big. And it doesn't, so far, hasn't got the same treatment. But Spain's failures of the rule of law are very much centered into the Catalan cause. It's not a general. I'm not an expert on Poland or Hungary, so I'm not going to get into what the failures of the rule of law those countries are. But in Spain, when you see a judge abusing human rights, it's mostly a case that relates to the Catalan case. So the observation that there is a discrimination against Catalans is not one that the status quo of Brussels wants to recognize, because it would be in a way recognizing, the claims of self-determination of Catalans, and that's not something that the status quo in Brussels, the elites in Europe in general, the political, is interested in, because that looks like something that would be destabilizing, and they are not interested in that. And I understand. So one thing is what political elites think, and the other thing is what courts of law do in places where the rule of law works reasonably well. Of course, it never works perfectly everywhere, but judges in Belgium or Germany or Scotland that received a request for extradition on the grounds of some lady that looks that has nothing, killed nobody or done anything obviously violent or anything like that. And this judge receives a request for extradition of this professor at St. Andrews, and their instinct is, okay, let's look. I mean, what has she done? Rebellion? That sounds a bit outdated. Sedition? What is sedition? So they just, they don't go ahead and say, okay, well, within the European Union, the European Union is the rule of law applies everywhere. We have an extradition treaty that judges should not be looking at details. Just send the person to whatever member country requests this person. Well, when you see things that look political, they look at it, and just by looking at it, things are not so quick as to send people out to Spain in a car of police with handcuffs. This was the image that the Spanish judges have of what was going to happen with their extradition requests. One could have, I think it's worth noticing that the Spanish judiciary is one of the institutions that was not reformed after the Spanish transition, which means that the people that get into the judiciary, well, the Spanish laws have changed over the years, and in many aspects they are totally democratic and modern laws, but the mentality of the high elites of Spain is still very rooted in the in the Franco regime, and the unity of Spain is one of the cornerstones of their ideological notion of what Spain is. So Spanish high courts have taken into their hands to defend the unity of Spain in the modern times. In more ancient times, they would have sent the army. Now Spain is in the European Union, and that's what makes the situation different. So in the European Union, okay, they send the police. It was not nice, and they did not get much approval from sending the police. Probably the fact that the police that was hitting people quite violently through the morning suddenly stopped on that day. We don't know what happened behind the scenes, but it was probably, the intervention of some authorities across the world. They would never say though. So this European thing is that, well, we don't approve when you go too far, but if you don't, if you're somewhat prudent, we will accept. And it's not that they, for example, the Pegasus business, I don't know if you have heard about that. This has been a huge scandal of the Spanish government had a huge operation of espionage on the Catalan political leaders, activists, everywhere. It was very well documented by Citizen Lab, which is an independent organization at the University of Toronto that documented the use of this spyware that gets into the telephone through mechanisms, and then they get everything that is in the telephone. So, and it's well known that the Spanish government has used that, but still they have not received much criticism from Europe. So they are needed, but on behind the scenes, the Spanish government has had to change the way they approach the Catalan issue. First, people who were sent to prison for 12 years, they were pardoned after a while. And now we're seeing the Spanish candidate to prime minister very openly defending that there needs to be an amnesty. So it's true that there is acceptance, but there is pressure.
I have lots of questions about the role of the European Union, about the situation in Spanish politics now, and about what will happen in the future, whether this Catalan movement will get back into action or not. But I think that we have spent 25 minutes now, and probably it's would be better to open this up to the people. And so I'm not exactly sure the procedures. Just people ask for questions, and I
raise your hand.
And you raise your hand, and I either Sophia or I'll.
Well, I'm not. I must confess that these recent events that you were describing, I am not, well informed about them. I think that Flanders is a nation within Belgium that, of course, has the right to self-determination. I'm not going to have an opinion on whether at this point is going to progress through a demand of independence or not. I have the impression that the majoritarian nationalist Flemish political forces are not for independence at this point, but of course, being nationalist, they have the right to consider that as an option. Like Flanders, there is also a big movement for independence in Scotland. So these are probably the three big, not stateless nations in Europe that could be part of a new search of independences in Europe. each of them has its specific, particularities. In general, I just think that Europe should have a mechanism for addressing these demands whenever they address. And it should be, rather than saying, well, no, this is out of the question, these are internal affairs of the states. Once once there is a demand for independence, substantially politically, democratically backed demand for independence in a member state, that's no longer an internal affair of the member state. But Europe, the European Union has its project in construction and has still needs a lot of mechanisms before it fails or it progresses to a more perfect union. And one of the things that I think it requires is addressing head on the issue of possible internal enlargement. So whether this will arise as a response to Flanders or to Catalonia, time will say. Or even Scotland, if Britain were to come back, but that's a little bit further out. Right? Thanks for your question.
Oh. Sure.
Thank you. Yes.
So I'd be curious to hear what you think.
Thank you. Yes, a year ago, the Spanish Parliament passed a revision of the code, the penal code in Spain. And the major change was the elimination of the crime of sedition, which was a crime that was one of the crimes that were used to indict our colleagues in government and to send them to prison for 12 years. Judges in Europe that examined the request for extradition were very critical of the use of this crime as the grounds for extradition in Germany, in Belgium, and in Scotland. Amnesty International and several human rights organizations that examined the sentences that were written at the Supreme Court of Spain to put my former colleagues in prison. They were very critical of the use of this crime because it was described as very undefined. It was very clearly political. It's a very unspecific description of what sedition is. And the Council of Europe also produced a report about these things, and they very clearly recommended Spain to revise their penal code. So they did, and they eliminated sedition from the penal code. They, in exchange to have this more acceptable to the Spanish public that feels very strongly against the Catalan movement. One must be aware that it's not only the authorities in Spain that are very attached to the idea that Spain is indivisible and that anything that moves against that is a huge catastrophe. This has support in the electorate. So the changes that the Socialist Party, who was in government, made, they were kind of very careful to convince the electorate that, okay, we're removing this crime, but we're putting another that is, in case these Catalans go back to whatever they wanted to do in 2017, we'll have tools to condemn them if they misbehave again. So they substitute the sedition for an aggravated public disorders thing. And they also tried to make some changes to the crime of misappropriation of funds, which was also used to condemn our colleagues. And the reaction was, it was very interesting because this elimination of the crime of sedition, I am the benefactor of that change, because for some reason that I could never figure out, they forgot to indict me for misappropriation of funds, so they only prosecuted me for sedition. At the time, I said, okay, well, they can get me in prison for 12 years, so what the hell? But it turned out that when they eliminated the sedition from the equation, I was home free, and I could go back to my country. So I went back to Barcelona in the spring, last spring, and I was briefly arrested. But now they only they prosecute me only for something called disobedience, which is also, if you think of it, as a person, as a democratic, with a democratic mind, and you have an idea of what division of powers is and all these things, it's also quite, what would I say? It's also something that they should remove from their penal code. But nevertheless, whatever they can do, if they convict you of disobedience, it's only, taking you off from office or banning you from running for office for a while, or they can give you a fine on it, okay? But they cannot put you in prison. So that's why I can get around the world freely right now, because they cannot, they eliminated the tool that they had used to prosecute me. But nevertheless, there is still the misappropriation of funds, and the judges in the Supreme Court very quickly reacted to the change of the penal code, but announcing to the world that, yes, they have convicted these members of government to sedition and misappropriation of funds, both. But they never clarified what part of the sentence of the 12 years was for the misappropriation of funds and what part was for the sedition. So now we're telling you that actually we convicted them for 12 years for the misappropriation of funds, which is, okay, it's quite stretching, but when it comes to Spanish judges, logic stops applying. And so this meant that in spite of them having changed the penal code, the President Puigdemont and other colleagues of government who were being prosecuted for misappropriation of funds, they are still, as today, being prosecuted by a Spanish judge that wants to put them into prison for 12 years. So yes, they try to, they react to the pressures of the Council of Europe and the European authorities, but still, the Spanish judges are still on guard in defense of Spain.
And if I say, just to clarify, the misappropriation of funds is not about funding the pocket.
Of course not. Yeah. It's, the misappropriation is the money that was spent on some of the campaign on TV, the money that was spent on travels around the world, explaining the Catalan cause. So it's really, there is nothing they could describe as anything related to corruption. But then they go into very elaborate written discussions of why this is corruption as well. Okay.
I have, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Noah. I am another one of the International Policy Associates, and I spent this last summer in Barcelona. And so I got to witness both the municipal elections for Spain as well as the national elections And we're about a little more than 3 months since the national election. We still don't have a result. A large part of that is due to your party holding out. And so I'm curious if you can talk to us a little bit about where you see that going, how you see this being resolved. Is there going to be another election in January? Is there going to be some resolution that sees Prime Minister Sanchez reelected? And then also if you could touch on what you see as the outcome potentially of the EU elections this coming spring.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First, clarification. It's not my party. I am an independent. It's the party of President Puigdemont that got the 6 votes that may or may not, 6 members of the Spanish parliament that may or may not elect him as the next, as in his second term as prime minister. So I don't have much to say about this other than when the election was called, I don't know how informed you are, after the municipal election, it was not only the municipal election, it was also the election in many of the Spanish comunidades autonomous communities, which are sort of states. They don't have the power of state, but anyway, so these are these administrative divisions of the regions. That election was also held on the municipal election day, and the Popular Party, which is the opposition to Mr. Sanchez, won most of them and took, the Socialist Party lost several regions that they had in government. So it was like, oh, for the Socialist Party, there was a move. It was a moment of, okay, we're going to lose the next election. And at the same time, it was the first time that the Popular Party entered the governments of several regions, Valencia, Murcia, and Extremadura, I think, together with Vox, which is an openly Francoist, at least. You can also say fascist if you want, where it's extreme Spanish, which makes it more extreme, right? Okay, so this is the data of the new regional governments. So the reaction of the Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez was, okay, we're getting into trouble. Let's do it, let's face this. And he called a snap election in the middle of the summer, which is totally unusual. Okay. And the prospect was that, well, the Popular Party or this coalition of the Popular Party and Vox were going to have a majority in the Spanish parliament. But, okay, Mr. Sanchez is, it's a very bold kind of politician, and his bet paid off because he did not win, but the Popular Party, together with Vox, did not win either. So then he was faced, the Spanish parliament was faced with a stalemate in which the Popular Party with Vox did not have a majority, and everybody else was not going to join them in a coalition because all the democratic forces don't want to join in a coalition in which Vox is also a participant. So there was a possibility of everybody else organizing a coalition, but this everybody else included the party of President Puigdemont, who had run on a platform that we will never vote Mr. Sanchez for president. That was their platform. But sure enough, the day after the election, the idea of amnesty starts floating on the air. And what had been impossible after that moment become possible. These things happen. Politics is a realm in which, I don't know, you guys study politics and know more about it than I do. But, what is possible and what is not possible may change very quickly. And at the same time, what was also impossible on the side of Mr. Puigdemont, which was to sit down and talk to the Spaniards, became possible also very quickly. And that's where we are right now. Mr. Sanchez has now, at this point, openly said that he supports an. They waited a lot before they openly talk about it. They let so the idea to float this to become sort of an acceptable idea. Now he's openly said this is going to be good for Spain. And at the same time, Mr. Puigdemont made a very solemn statement at the beginning of September saying, okay, we're ready to talk, even if it's not yet to talk about self-determination, which was in a way to say, well, we are ready to support government of Mr. Sanchez, but still the details of this negotiation have not publicly transpired, and it's still uncertain. There is a little bit less than 4 weeks to go before, if they don't reach an agreement by November 27, they will have to call another election. If I have to, I'm not sure what will happen. Mr. Puigdemont is at this point in history known for taking decisions at the last minute. I mean, all negotiations that have a deadline are until the last minute. I wrote a paper about that when I was at Princeton. So that's normal, but still, the fact, and I have become to know him as a person, and at this point, I am not. I've seen what has happened. The observation of the facts up until now leads me to conclude that there will be an agreement. But the observation of the personality leads me to think that maybe not. So I don't know. At the same time, I see, Sanchez as a politician that has grown very much in his shoes. He's brave and bold, whatever he's. And I see that they are putting an act that looks serious for their game. I'm not sure the other side is up to the same level, so we'll see. When it comes to the European elections, that's even more difficult. I have the impression that the forces that are now at the EPP and ECR will be very strong. That the Rassemblement National in France will be very strong, and Poland will probably take revenge on Mr. Tusk. So I see these two groups as being very strong. The right and the extreme right, I think, will be strengthened in the next election. Other than that, the Social Democrats in Europe having a serious hard time, offering a coherent platform. So we'll see. It's I don't dare to make any predictions. Thanks.
My name's Don. I'm a junior here in the School of Public International Affairs. I'm a student with LISD. I'm curious, we've seen recently and kind of throughout the last almost decade now, referendums not only be used in cases like yours, where it's used democratically and with all the right motivations, it seems, but also used to try and subvert democracy in other scenarios like in Ukraine and the Donbass and other regions. And so I'm curious, as you look at self-determination in the EU going forward, how do you balance the, I guess you could say, right cases with cases where it's being used for malicious purposes? And is that purely just putting in criteria, like you mentioned, to be kind of legitimate and valid? Or I guess, how do you reconcile these two tracks of like referendums and self-determinations, one being used for true self-determination and one being used for foreign influence and malicious activity? Thank you.
That's a hard question. That's the, I mean, if I had a good answer to that, I would probably, there is always the argument against referenda is always the fear of, populist manipulation or foreign influence. That's even worse, right? But there is always these people that wanted to oppose our right to hold a referendum of self-determination, always makes this argument that, well, politics is more complex. Look at Brexit. It was not. So my position on that is, well, if you have to decide about a binary issue, you have, the way to decide it is a referendum. You may want to call it like that, And on the other hand, binary choices are the only ones in which voting is not manipulable. Now I could go into my theoretical hat, but I won't. Okay. So I think that there is an issue of that we cannot give up defending the right of self-determination because of, second order, maybe very important, but second order political situations in which referenda are being used to exploit a position of abuse. But okay, I think that the honest answer to your question is a humble, I really don't know. But that's a question that you guys at Princeton should explore and answer.
I'm David Wyman. I'm a master's in public policy student at the graduate school. Thank you very much, Professor Ponsati, for coming and speaking to us. I really appreciate your perspectives. I spent a couple months in Catalonia in 2021 biking through villages near the Pyrenees. And over that time, I think I must have seen hundreds of pro-independence flags. And I don't think I saw a single Spanish flag. So my thought is that the Catalan desire for independence seems undiminished. And so with that in mind, I ask you, do you think that you'll see an independent Catalonia in your lifetime? And what do you think the future for the independence movement is in the long term? Thank you.
Thank you. It's true that Catalans want independence. It's also true that there are a lot of Spaniards living in Catalonia. And there is a fraction of the population in Catalonia that is more ambivalent. But I mean, there is also another important observation, which is that Catalonia is a land of migration, and that we have received a huge wave of new migration in the last couple of decades. And it's still on. Catalonia received a lot of Spanish migration during the Franco regime in the 60s through the 70s, but that was migration from Spain, mostly from the rural Spain into Catalonia. So this is what generates the demographic complexity of the Catalan population. But what is true is that if you ask somebody, are you Catalan or are you Spanish? If they answer you, I am Catalan, the next question is, are you pro-independence? The chances that this person tells you I am pro-independence It's almost, the correlation is almost one. But demographically, we are, Catalans are, not that strong in our territory. Okay, I could go about, and I could discuss a little bit about Catalans that are not in the territorial frame of the Catalan autonomous community, but there is also Catalans, Mallorca, Valencia, south of France. These are the Catalan countries. Catalan, being Catalan basically means speaking. That's it's a little bit that's a little bit stretching it, but that's what if you ask people what defines their Catalan identity, it's very much linked to the language. So, do I think I will see an independent Catalonia? Well, I think that the demographic data right now don't favor us, and that the fact that the previous attempt that we made in 2017 has not ended well doesn't favor us either. But I think we're still strong, and we can still try to rebuild the political tools that are needed for another attempt. But we will need to construct those, and we need to be aware of the challenges that the complex demographic population pose to us, and immigration of people from outside Spain, mostly from Africa and Latin America, is one of the big components of this demographic challenge. I don't think this is necessarily an unsurmountable obstacle, but I think that being very aware of this situation and defining policies to address that and to extend the identification of newcomers to our land as Catalans is part, or is probably the biggest part of having a new wave for Catalonia. So yes, I'm still hopeful, but it's certainly not a done deal. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Josephina. My question is a little similar to yours, but it's more about your personal perception of the movement since 2017, because you've spent some time away from Spain. So I'm wondering if that has changed how you feel about the movement, or as you said, by any methods, it might have been more successful in the future or in the past, even looking back, or anything you just may have come across in your time away from Spain.
Well, thank you. That's a very good question. I think that it's not the same thing to be in exile in 2020, 21 than to be in exile on, 1920, 21, right? It's very different. We have the fortune of, we are on the news, and we follow the activity of whatever happens in Catalonia, directly through the social networks, and we can have a video conference with 50 people in Catalonia. You can have meetings with your political partners. So at this, in this sense, you can follow what's going on as almost as if you were there. But it is true that not being there, there is something that has to do with, physical proximity that matters. It's intangible, but it's important. And upon now I have been able to return, and basically what you can perceive by being on the ground is what the attitude, the direct communication with normal people that walk on the streets that, stop and tell you what they think. And that's, of course, this is not a representative sample, but it's, it's whenever people that stop you, very recurrently tell you the same thing, well, that probably means something. That, of course, the robot portrait of people that stop you also have some interest. I tend to be stopped by ladies of my age. That happens. Let's face it, among Catalans, the demographics also is geared towards people of the Spanish baby boom, which was the generation later than your baby boom. But anyway, so by being on the ground, one can feel a huge disappointment at politicians. That's one thing one can feel. The other is, and that's, they may seem incompatible, but they also happen, a huge respect, or, I would call it affection for the leadership of President Puigdemont. That's also, it is part of the data. People love him, an important fraction of the people love him. And at the same time, an important fraction of people who were very active in the independence, who were participated in the referendum, holding doors and doing all these things, they feel they have been let down and they are upset or, disappointed. It varies. Okay, but I mean that this is a feeling that I think it will take a long time and big efforts to convince Catalans that they can trust politicians again, and that's tough. I'm not sure I answered your question fully, but at least I tried.
Thank you very much for your time today, Mrs. Ponsati. My name is Finn Doyle. I'm a freshman in the SPIA department. And I understand that the Catalan community extends, like you already mentioned, to parts of the south of France. So my question was whether you think independence movement has a stronger chance in the south of France, would be more receptive by the French government, if at all.
That's a good question.
Which I suppose probably not. But if you think that perhaps a stronger push for independence in the south of France could perhaps influence international opinion further towards independence in the rest of Spain.
Okay. Well, my feeling is that France has been very effective at suppressing Catalan identity in the territory that was until the 1659 part of the Spanish crown just gave away part of Catalonia, including one, the second best city. Our Perpignan was our second most important city at the time. It's still a beautiful city. I recommend it. But France has been very effective at unification and elimination of diversity. They basically eliminated the Occitan language. They have not quite eliminated the Catalan language in their territory, but it's hard at this point. It's very hard to find young people that speak Catalan in Perpignan, in the Roussillon, of that. There is a substantial effort to revive this. There is a very interesting initiative, which is now quite old, of schools that do Catalan immersion, but this, for the moment, covers only a small fraction of the population. So I don't think there is that an Catalan independence movement is on the charts in the near future in France. Nevertheless, it's true that the Catalans who are north of the border, they are not Spanish. They don't have a Spanish passport. And that gives them a different character. And they are still Catalans. They were very, very involved in the preparations of the referendum. The anecdote is that the urns that we use for voting were brought to northern France through Marseille by a fellow who is a French citizen, and he did, all the operation to have these, and he had them. He kept them in a storage place somewhere around Elna or something, and so there was a network of activists in northern Catalonia that were very, very important in the logistical organization of the referendum. And whatever Catalans in France, they kind of put a lot of their energies into that. They were crucial in the practical organization, and I think they are part of this, collective of disappointed, because even though they knew that, they live in a part that was not part of the independence or the potential independence new country, they still, having a state that represents your nation is important. For example, for people in Quebec who are not independent, it's very important that France exists, and that it was very important in the 60s that President de Gaulle went there and told them that he supported Free Quebec. And now that probably that movement is not that strong for a number of reasons, but it's important that they know that there is a state in the world that protects their language and their culture. So that's why for the moment we only have Andorra in the United Nations, and well, I think that's not enough. But it's important that your culture and your language gets a slot in the international arena. Thank you. This is amazing. Princeton students are amazing.
Educated in a school that broke the rules by teaching Catalan students. So I was wondering how these educational institutions and entities are grappling with the fickle winds of this independence movement. Thank you.
Thanks. That's a very good question. Again, I think that one of the effects of the failure of the 2017 independence attempts is that we have moved backwards in the school system. The school system, I don't know how much you know about it. You seem to be very well informed, but in case of for everybody else, when Catalonia got its autonomy in 78-80 under President Pujol, a new schooling system was set up in Catalonia, which was a system of Catalan immersion. So throughout the public school system, which was basically the whole population. The system was one in which pupils were taught in Catalan. Pupils were also taught Spanish as a subject, and all the pupils of the system came out speaking both languages, but everybody was taught, and subjects were taught in Spanish, and teachers were well trained and well motivated to do their job in Catalan. And that meant that a huge fraction of the population that were of Spanish descent, because they were the children of this wave of immigration that had arrived in the 60s and the 70s, they were schooled in Catalan, and they were trained to work and to function as citizens with both languages. At the same time, there was sort of an ideology or a narrative of that, which was, well, we're all one single people, no matter what our origins are. We are all, we're all Catalans. We're all, we can all speak the language of the land. This was more or less true. Of course, when it started, the schooling system was in Spanish, so there was a transition, which was quite successfully done at the primary school, not so successful at the secondary school, but okay. It was true that most of the system was in Catalan. But at the same time, it was in Catalan, but it was not 100% in Catalan. And, if some teachers didn't want to teach in Spanish, in Catalan, and they were teaching in Spanish, or, they were in a neighborhood where the native language was mostly Spanish, and they adapted to that. There was a very militant avoidance of conflict policy. So we didn't want to hear about any conflict. It was very clear that, the narrative was, this is not an issue. We don't have a problem with people who don't want to speak Catalan. This is so in a way, maybe this was a reasonable policy when that was, the possible problems were localized and marginal. But with the more recent waves of migration and with the change in the means of communication, the system of Catalan immersion has lost a lot of its character. And the fact is that the recent data reveal that, in fact, the Catalan schooling system is a bilingual at most system. So it's bilingual, but nevertheless, there is, especially after the 2017 events, there is more and more families that refuse to have their children educated in Catalan and go to courts and request that Spanish is imposed in the school of their children. And the fact is that the courts are making decisions in favor of this family. So, in a way, what's going on is that Spanish nationalism in Catalonia is being much more militant. It had never been before the referendum. The courts are supporting them. And that is combined with huge waves of Latin American newcomers in the communities that, of course, speak Spanish and naturally are happy to get their children educated only in Spanish. So the the Catalan education system is no longer a system of immersion. And, the loss, the loss of authority or of moral authority of the political leadership has had a big role in kind of accepting this situation as something that cannot be reversed, and it's going to be very problematic to keep a Catalan system of education. I'll try to be brief.
Yeah, well,
And just touches upon what you discussed earlier on the EU level, how the EU should have more systems for dealing with situations where there are drives for separation. My question is, in situations of autonomy, drawing on Catalonia's experiences, of course, there are other regions in Europe that struggle with these questions of autonomy, like South Tyrol, for example, in Italy, or the Hungarian minority in Romania. So what can we learn from Catalonia's examples for how the EU should address questions of autonomy at a higher level? Thank you.
Hello, Ms. Ponsati. It's a pleasure to have you here. My name is Victoria. I am from Argentina, and I'm also an IPA here in LISD. And my question was kind of similar in that, how can movements of self-determination, especially within the same region, work together, work parallelly, or is there some sort of like companionship that can happen between groups, especially thinking about los Países Vascos, the Basque countries, I think it's called, I don't know how it's called in English. How do these movements, or how can they work together if they even do so? Thank you very much.
Hello, Professor Ponsati. My name's Thomas Strong. I'm a freshman here at Princeton. In recent years, we've seen instances of independence and nationalist movements come to political significance organically, so to speak. But we've also seen calls for independence or autonomy be supported by outside powers as a means to sow instability, or even as a pretense for invasion. How should European policymakers confront these examples of nationalism that are supported by outside powers, even if legitimate?
I mean, okay, I'll start for the last one. I mean, of course, one of the most of the independence movements get success out of their role in, the other conflicts, right? So you can think of the Baltic countries, arising as the result of the Soviet Union collapse, but also as the interest of, the great powers to terminate with the Soviet Union. So, and one of the problems with the Catalonian cause is that, there is not obvious partner or bigger power that has an interest in our independence. So, in this sense, when you ask your question, you say, well, how should we address, this? If a power supports an independence, and you said even if legitimate, well, if it's legitimate, well, as long as it's democratic, peaceful. Usually, the problem is that, when big powers participate in these issues, the conditions of peaceful, democratic, and so on, these conditions may or may not hold, right? So I think that, and that I'm going to try to answer your question, which is difficult at the same time that I answer the second question. I think that, we're seeing, I am amazed that today I have all these fantastic Princeton students sitting here and talking to me, while a much important, bigger, dangerous, whatever, I would go on with adjectives and run out of it, is going on that makes our cause like, hey, Clara, hey, Catalans, why do you bother us? There is more important things in the world going on, right? Our problems compared to, the Middle East are just small details, right? But on the other hand, if the European Union is not able to address issues of self-determination in the geopolitical areas that are not, hotspots, and in communities that are ready to address their issues with democratic and peaceful means, if they are not able to show the world that this can be managed in a civilized and democratic and peaceful way, then they are kind of telling to the self-determination movements that have committed to peaceful movements, well, maybe you're wrong. And that's the message that the European elites need to take home. There is, at this point, you can look at the Mediterranean and you see two conflicts of self-determination. One has the potential to generate a worldwide crisis. And of course, we need to think and address and spend a lot of energy at resolving that and bringing peace to that area. But at the same time, on the other side, you have this movement of self-determination that doesn't threaten anyone. And if the approach of the political Western elites is, we don't care, the message to that movement is, well, be a bigger problem. And that's, okay, we got the message. We need to be a bigger problem. Okay. But of course, our problem is how to be a bigger problem without becoming a threat to, to Europe. And I think that if the European Union, and that has to do with other movements as well, right? There is always the when the union or the I like to think of the establishment elites, which are what keeps our part of the Western world, with all its imperfections, on hold. They have some serious issues, but if we have a reasonable way of life that that is supported on democratic values and prosperity, well, it's in part it's because we have been able to create a network of elites that, well, they benefit from being the elite, but they keep together. But if they don't work hard at producing the institutional tools to resolve these conflicts that are not so heated before they become so heated, or then in a way they are giving the wrong message to other potential self-determinations in the world. I mean, I don't think Catalans are, I think that our cause will either, prevail through democratic and peaceful means, or it will die out by assimilation through, our children, and will be absorbed into Spain. Which of the two will happen? I don't think. I hope the first one, because if we become absorbed into Spain, it will be a pity. The diversity of the world will be worse, and we will not be ourselves. But I don't see a danger of that. And for example, the Basque Country, who was a place where violence was part of the political equation, has moved away from that. And I think that is fantastic news. But if the the legitimate demand of the Basque people for self-determination doesn't get a response, there will be a discussion about, is this progress, was this something that had to be done or not? And that also applies to Ireland and so on. So I think that's I know that this is basically a moral challenge to the establishment, and that's not the only reason why the establishment take action. But still, I think they are still, that's important.
Oh, sorry, Sophie. No, I was going to say that I think it's six
Yes.
has been let me say, as part of the conversation, that has been an incredible session, and I mean it, both on the side of our guests, but also the audience. I'm amazed, also, although I know Princeton students, but I'm very, very happy, about the level of engagement. And with that, just, thank you again for sharing with us all this.
Oh, thank
you.